Okay, we are on.
Good afternoon. We are so excited. We are so excited. We are so excited that you have joined us for this, another Theology Tuesday session where we are having a wonderful time during our Tuesday Bible study, talking about phenomenal issues and topics. As you know, for the month of October, we've been talking about particular biblical passages that highlight domestic violence awareness. Why, you might ask? Because October is National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. The color during this month is purple. So as you can see, I'm wearing a purple shirt here in honor of this being our last Tuesday in October for us to talk about Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I'm going to share my screen and I want to highlight particular information for you in these moments. Please know that the slides that you see that we share during our time together, please make sure you have pen and paper so you can jot down information that you see on these slides. Also, if you're watching this program from a mobile device like a godly divine iPhone, then you have an ability to screenshot the slides you see. If you don't have a godly divine iPhone and you have one of these sinful, devilish Androids, let me encourage you. You can't screenshot with an Android. So please, please come on over to the light. Accept Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior and get you a divine, holy iPhone so you can take screenshots of important information that you see online. And so I'd like for you to check out in these moments this particular image that you see on your screen gives you information about October being Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And we want you to know, my beautiful, wonderful brothers and sisters, that if you or someone that you know is currently impacted by domestic violence, there is help. There is help. There is hope. Please reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline. The National Domestic Violence Hotline telephone number is 1-800-799-SAFE. Again, that's 1-800-799-SAFE, SAFE, or 7233. Also, you can learn more information about the National Domestic Violence Hotline by visiting their website, www.thehotline.org. www.thehotline.org. It's so important for us to continue the conversation about domestic violence awareness even after the month of October ends. So please, just because this is our last Tuesday, highlighting domestic violence awareness, please, 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 my brothers and sisters, don't let the conversation end right there. Don't let the conversation end right there. According to the Centers for Disease Control, there are particular statistics about domestic violence awareness that we want to highlight on today. It is believed that about 1 in 5 women and about 1 in 7 men report having experienced severe physical violence from an intimate partner in their lifetime. That's right. 1 in 5 or 1 in 7 is a lot, considering all of the people in our world today. That is a lot of people experiencing physical violence from an intimate partner. It's also noted to be noted that about 1 in 5 women and about 1 in 12 men have experienced contact sexual violence by an intimate partner. Oftentimes, when we talk about domestic violence awareness, we must also, brothers and sisters, highlight sexual violence. Sexual violence, physical assault, or rape is also a form of domestic violence. And we have to begin to highlight the importance of talking about domestic violence. as it also relates to sexual violence and sexual assault. Last but not least, it is believed that 10% of women and 2% of men report having been stalked by an intimate partner. We like to list up in toxic relationships, stalking, but this is inappropriate. Stalking or toxic relationships are also a form of domestic violence. We must highlight these facts and figure out how to break the silence and how to address this. It's also important during this time. The reason I wanted to show you these statistics is because we also have to highlight that domestic violence is just not a woman's issue. Oftentimes, when we talk about domestic violence, we feature domestic violence from the perspective of female or woman as victim, male as perpetrator. We want you to know that there are a lot of gentlemen who are also the victim of violence. Also, when we talk about domestic violence, we tend to only focus on heterosexual relationships, but there's a lot of domestic violence happening in LGBTQ relationships. So this is not simply just a heterosexual problem. This is an all type of relationship problem. Do you know we're also seeing domestic violence on the rise among teenage relationships? That's right. According to the Centers for Disease Control, teenagers between the age of 13 and 18 are now starting to express concerns and be at the top of statistics around emergency room visits in major hospitals across the country as a result of domestic violence incidents or sexual violence or stalking. And so this is a particular issue that impacts all persons across age, across sexual orientation. So please, friends, know that this is an important topic that we must continue to talk about during our time together. And so during this month of October, we've been focusing on a particular book. I'm going to turn your attention to this book, and I'm going to ask, if you don't have this book, please get this book. This book will change your life. The name of this book is entitled Text of Terror. Text of Terror, Literary Feminist Readings of Biblical Narrative by Phyllis Treble. This is a hidden jewel. We've been censoring this book for this entire month of October, and I want to invite you, if you haven't already purchased this book, please do so. You will absolutely love this book. This book will change your life. I'm trying to tell you, this book will change your life. And so what we want to do, since this is our last Tuesday together, and for the sake of our Bible studies on Tuesdays, this will be one of the last times we'll talk about domestic violence awareness. As next month, for the month of November, we're going to shift. We're going to shift in the month of November and talk about another wonderful hot topic. So you don't want to miss joining us next Tuesday. I'll leave it as a surprise. And so we want to do a summary of our 4 stories and highlight some important points around domestic violence. This book highlights 4 important stories, and we spent the last month of October talking about these stories. So now we're just going to do some overview highlights. I'm going to give you a moment. If you don't have pen and paper handy, please, family, run, and get pen and paper. All right, you got pen and paper now? Okay. The first story that we want to highlight is the physical assault of Hagar. The physical assault of Hagar. This is the first story that our beloved scholar Phyllis Treble highlights, and how there are important points that we want to highlight. You know the story of the physical assault of Hagar because you've attended Bible study and you attend Sunday worship. You've heard our pastor preach on this story and teach on this story several times. This is the story of Hagar, who she is the mother of Ishmael. And Ishmael is conceived between her and Abraham, the wonderful father of our faith. Why? Because Abraham and Sarah get scared one day because God has promised that they will give birth to a whole generation and heirs of children. But because it's not happening in their time, they decide to help God because they're used to, even though microwaves didn't exist when they were living, they're used to a microwave mentality that says, gotta have it now, gotta have it now, gotta have it now. And so they decide to take matters into their own hands. As Sarah suggests to Abraham, why don't you lie with my maiden servant, this young lady, Hagar, who the text tells us is a young lady. She's not a grown woman. She's a young lady, and many Hebrew scholars estimate her age to be about 16 years old. And they then conceive of and create a child. And after the child is born, Abraham decides he wants to be in his son Ishmael's life. And so he still wants Hagar and Ishmael to live with him. But unfortunately, Sarah is getting more and more upset and frustrated. Why? Because she and Abraham actually do conceive a child later. The baby's name would be named Isaac. And she gets upset now because she sees Ishmael playing with his little brother Isaac. And she becomes a little content. So she tells Abraham one day, you need to kick Hagar out. Kick her and her nappy-headed son Ishmael out. And so Abraham does that. He kicks them out of the house, right? And we lift up this text because this is the first text of violence. Why do you say that? Why does this text highlight violence? Why does our scholar Phyllis Tribble lift this up? Particularly, why do we highlight this story during Domestic Violence Awareness Month? We highlight this story because prior to Abraham kicking Hagar and Ishmael out, it is when Hagar first becomes pregnant and her stomach is growing larger and larger and larger. She is physically assaulted by Sarah. She runs into the wilderness. An angel of the Lord speaks to her in the wilderness, tells her to go back home because she can, as a pregnant woman, live her life in the wilderness, so she goes back home. But we lift up this story because it's the first story that highlights domestic violence between two women. Domestic violence between the mother figure and a daughter figure. Because Sarah currently was serving as a surrogate mother to Hagar, if you will. And so during Domestic Violence Month, we want to highlight, unfortunately, violent mother-daughter relationships. Yes, that is a form of domestic violence. Domestic violence doesn't just highlight violence in intimate partner relationships, but we have to also look at domestic violence from the perspective of family violence, particularly in parental-child relationships. And so first and foremost, the reflective question for us to examine is, how do we take serious violence that happens in our families between loved ones? What can we do to begin to address family violence? A wonderful book that I invite you to get is by a clinical psychologist, and an African-centered clinical psychologist at that, by the name of Nancy Boyd Franklin. In this book entitled Black Families in Therapy, Black Families in Therapy. And she invites us to think about the ways in which systemic oppression and African enslavement and Jim Crow lynching and the period of civil rights have caused us now to internalize violence that we have experienced as an African people and as a Black people in these so-called United States of America, and now the ways in which we become violent in our families, violence to our children, and we act out violence now. Spanking is one way that we act out violence in our families, and so I want to encourage you, my brothers and sisters. Another reflective question for us today is, how do we resist spanking? How do we resist spanking our children, physically assaulting our children in the name of disciplining them? Especially thinking that we're doing what thus says the Lord. That's what the biblical text tells us to do, sparing the rod. How do we understand that spanking is a form of physical violence? Nancy Boyd Franklin highlights that. If you need another reference for that, I would invite you to check out this wonderful book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, PTSS, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, by Dr. Joy DeGruy, D-E-G-R-U-Y. Joy DeGruy highlights the ways in which physical violence is inappropriate. And it is something we've internalized from African enslavement. And so we believe that physical violence in the form of spanking is what we should do to our children to keep them in line. This is not right, my brothers and sisters. Resist spanking your children. Resist spanking your children. Resist spanking your children. And so, let me pause for a second. Yes, sir.
Yeah, incidentally, the scripture does not say spare the rod, spoil the child. That's not in the scripture. So, we quote that, and we quote it because we've heard people throw stuff together that is not exactly what the scripture said. So just wanted to lift that up, that spare the rod, spoil the child is not in the Bible.
Thank you for highlighting that. Thank you for highlighting that. So we want to invite you to continue to reflect on how do you address violence in your own family? What are ways in which you can speak out against violence that exists in your family? Any comments from our family online?
The only comment I see Diane points out to the question, how do we resist spanking our children? He says, we're supposed to be able to sit down and verbally communicate with our children instead of provoking physical violence to them. And she says, I also want to add, as a retired school teacher in my training, I was taught that spanking a child on his bottom will cause them to have bathroom issues of not wanting to go or can't go. Also, I'll add that when a lot of times spanking is out of frustration and even sometimes anger with stuff that really doesn't have anything to do with our children, but because something comes up with the children, then we end up taking it out on them. And to add to what Diane said, oftentimes if we have not been the attentive parent that we should have been from birth, as the child matures, there becomes this break in the relationship where we get frustrated at some point because we're not connecting. It's important that we not let what we call work and other things keep us from this relationship with our children, where where our presence is there, our mind is there, and we're having conversations with our children. We're talking with them. We're finding out without, trying to always tell them, don't do this, don't do that, but what's really on their mind, so that they feel free enough to express or to share things with us. And that can reduce the, that urge to think that, if I hit them, then it's going to make them listen. I got spanked a lot. I didn't necessarily listen. And I admit I did some spanking because I was raised in that way. And it wasn't until, I had grandchildren that I realized that it just doesn't work. It doesn't work.
I am resisting as the one of a 13-year-old who has a mom who refuses my mom refuses to spank her beloved 13-year-old because now she's seen the light.
Yeah, see, yeah, you talk about me too. Cause my two sons who have children, my daughter doesn't have any children, but they like, this is a new person. This is a totally different person. This is not the same person that I grew up with.
That's what I say to my mom. She's like, no, Danielle, studies show the spanking is bad. I'm like, what was these studies at 40 years ago? Thank you. These studies didn't exist 30 years ago when I was 10 and 12. I think they're the same studies. No, I totally get it. 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 We also, the second story that our wonderful book highlights that presents some reflective questions for us to reflect on is The Rape of Tamar. The Rape of Tamar. I want to invite you to check out this wonderful book by Pamela Cooper White. Pamela Cooper White. It's entitled The Cry of Tamar. Check this book out. You will love this book, The Cry of Tamar by Pamela Cooper White. I want to invite you to check this book out. We've heard the story time and time again of, unfortunately, the rape of Tamar. We've heard this story time and time again. Her brother, technically he was her stepbrother. Her brother, unfortunately, tells one of his friends one day, you know what? I really have a crush on my stepsister. I really have a crush on my stepsister. And his friend says to him, you know what you should do then? You should pretend like you're sick one day. Ask her to make you a plate of food. Even tell your dad that you're sick and your sister needs to bring you a plate of food. And then when she comes to bring you something to eat, because you're not feeling well, then all of a sudden you jump on top of her and you have your way with her. You rape her. We've heard about this story. We spoke in depth about this story during our time together in October. And there's a couple of reflective points that we want to highlight. One, my brother who raped his stepsister, he doesn't initially think of this plan. Someone told him this plan. His friend, another gentleman in the community, told him, this is what you should do. And so one reflective question for us today is, we have to be careful. How are we participating in violence simply by what we tell other people to do? Lord, forgive us for all the times we have crafted devious plans for other people to commit or facilitate against other victims of oppression. We are just as much responsible. We are also responsible if we turn a blind eye to violence without holding perpetrators accountable. I am reminded currently of our brother R. Kelly, who was recently convicted of sex trafficking in the great state of New York. And I was excited to know that he would finally stand for justice and receive justice and be held accountable for his actions. At the same time, I was also deeply saddened by all of the number of people who have co-signed his behavior and participated as co-conspirators in his acts, right? There are parents who look the other way. There are family members and friends he had. There are media record label executives and other media executives who have also looked the other way while he committed these acts. There are people who went to get little girls and retrieve them and bring them to him. And so I said, everybody must stand trial, not just R. Kelly. R. Kelly is not the only guilty party, but there are so many others in the community who are guilty. And we see this in this narrative of the rape of Tamar. Her brother is not the only conspirator in her rape, but her brother's friend is also a conspirator as well, and he needs to be held accountable. We see in this story, violence begets violence, because yes, this gentleman, this brother, he goes ahead, he follows the plan, given to him by his friend. He claims to be sick one day. He summons his dad. He tells his dad, hey, I don't feel good. Give my sister, your daughter, to cook me something and bring me something to eat. And so the dad goes ahead. He tells his daughter, Tamar, go ahead. Go serve your brother something to eat. He's not feeling well. Right? And unfortunately, the brother goes ahead and he rapes his stepsister. He rapes his stepsister, Tamar. And then all of a sudden, Tamar happens to be talking to one of her other brothers by the name of Absalom. And she shares with him, Absalom, look what our brother did to me. He raped me. Absalom then goes and kills his other brother for raping, unfortunately, Tamar. Violence begets violence. Why did Absalom kill his brother for raping his sister? He kills his brother because he goes to his father and says, Father, look what your other son did. Your other son raped my sister, your daughter. Do something. And his dad refuses to do anything. This is another reflective question for us. Guess who his father is? His father is King David. His father is King David. King David, the gentleman that we recognize in our faith there, a man after God's own heart. David was the one who is supposed to be the most spiritually grounded. Yes, he is spiritually grounded. He has the heart of God, or he is the heart of God. He is closely connected to God. So this text also asks us to reflect on what are the ways in which we as parents, even those who sit in the church, closely connected to God, have deep spiritual faith. What are the ways in which we have taken a blind eye to violence by our children, violence in our communities, and look the other way without saying anything? Violence begets violence because David chose to remain silent. His son Absalom takes matters in his own hands and kills his oppressive brother who raped Tamar. And so another question that this invites us to reflect on is, as parents, how are we raising our sons? Are we raising our sons like King David raised one of his sons to be okay with raping a girl, a woman? How are we raising our boys today? I want to invite you to check out this wonderful image that highlights 5 things moms and dads must teach their sons about how to treat girls. 1, we must learn to treat girls with dignity and respect. 2, we must begin to recognize that every girl is unique. 3, we must highlight that communication is key. 4, we must teach our sons to be a gentleman. 5, we must teach our sons that no means no. 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 I'll pause there for a second. Any thoughts from our audience as we think about this story of the rape of Tamar?
Right now, we don't have any comments on the chat line, but I remember I was in a men's Bible class with Dr. Wright, and it was an older gentleman, and he made a comment, and his comment was that, he was trying to make a comment on something else, and he didn't realize what he was saying, and so he said when his son was in college, or I don't know if his son was in college at that time, but he said he would show up unannounced, because he said, I got to check on my money, see how this boy is, making sure that, he's taking care of business. So he would show up unannounced every now and then. And he said, now, every now and then, he would check it, he would catch his son goofing off, And so he said, this is what he would say to his son. He said, look, boy, I need you to be taking care of business here, because with, It costs money to be down here at school. I need you to get the grades you need to get so you can go on, with your life, and you have that education behind you. Now he said, now look, I know young people got to have some fun. I know you got to, and I'm gonna say it just like he said it. He said, I know a lot of girls out here, and you gotta, tag you a piece of, every now and then, and that, and so, but just make sure you take care of business. And Dr. Wright pushed him. I mean, he said, "Did you realize what you just said?" He said, "Well, what do you mean?" Dr. Wright said, "Would you tell your daughter that?" That
Wow.
yeah, you get your
Wow.
studies, but it's all right for you to, tag a brother every now and then, get your little piece every now and then. Would you say that to your daughter? He said, "No, I wouldn't say that." Well, why wouldn't you say that to your daughter? And it became real clear of how, Juwanta Kunjufu said years ago that that oftentimes, in particular, he was talking about mothers. He said mothers tend to raise their daughters and love their sons. But it can be true for the way we socialize boys, that it's just boys being boys. But girls, no, that's unladylike and all that type of stuff. When in reality, it is disrespectful on how we are seeing each other. In particular, how we teach boys to see women and girls as a piece, breasts, thighs, butt, this or that. We teach them to objectify, and when the whole society objectifies people. But from your list, instead of always focusing on girls, keep your dress down, your pants up, don't wear provocative clothes. I don't care if the woman is butt naked, you got no business trying to take it from her. Instead of always trying to put the onus on women to dress properly and things like that, teach boys that no means no, as the list said, and rape is rape. You just can't take stuff, teach boys not to do that, that we are not objects, we are subjects of God. So value life, period. So
Yes.
that
Yes.
we do have Diane says, well, let me start way back. Isla made the comment about I guess about spanking. She said and being spanked. She said, and when she was spanked, she didn't repeat the offense. So she respectfully disagrees. She says, deal with children according to their personalities and actions. And then Diane says, I raised my son as a single parent, and the list that you have, I did teach him those things. I also had his godfather to help me raise him because my son's father was in the Navy and he was out at sea. He was not really a part of his life growing up until he became a teenager. And now he's a grown man in the Air Force, and those values have stuck with him, and I'm proud of him. So those are the comments.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. My sister who commented that spanking can be helpful. I want to invite you to check out Joy DeGroove's book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, because a wonderful point that she highlights for us to reflect on and think about is the ways in which, yes, spanking, we have internalized in the Black community doing spankings, or in some cases, even beatings. We've internalized that in the Black community because, yes, that is what we were told to do, or indoctrinated or internalized with from African enslavement, when we ourselves were beat by European slave masters to, in some sense, stay in line. So when we spank our children, we're not spanking our children to discipline them. We're spanking our children to keep them in line. So first, I would invite you to reflect on what did you really teach your child by spanking him or her? What are you really teaching them? And are you really teaching them, or are you really just telling them to stay in line? Number two, new studies now by the American Psychological Association suggest that spanking a child creates low self-esteem. That's right. Spanking a child creates low self-esteem in that child. So what now ends up happening, we are discovering that we have now tons of children who have matured into adults who now wrestle with low self-esteem in all shapes and forms and fashions. Low self-esteem and fear. Low self-esteem and fear, and even have trouble now moving into embracing courage and bravery, because spankings in some sense takes away your ability from a psychological perspective to now embrace confidence, which is why European slave masters spanked us when we were enslaved as Africans. They spanked us to take away our desire to want freedom, take away our self-esteem and our dignity, to even believe that we deserved freedom, and took away our self-confidence. And so that's in a sense what we're learning now. We have a whole Generation X. I'm 42 years old. I'm Generation X. We have a whole Generation X now, 40 and 50-year-olds who experience spankings and now wrestle with low self-esteem and extreme forms of low self-esteem that now are moving into mental illness as a result of receiving spankings and beatings from parents. And so it does have a long-term psychological impact. We've discovered that spankings work temporarily. So yes, it meets an immediate need of getting your child in line. You're not teaching them anything, you're just getting them in line. But long-term, it has a long-term negative psychological effect where we're now seeing that it increases low self-esteem and even leads to, in extreme form, mental illness among our children. So I do want to highlight that and invite you to please check out this book by Dr. Joy DeGruy, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. She highlights more on this point that I've just made. We want to shift now and highlight another story talked about in our Text of Terror book by Phyllis Tribble. The third story that our sister highlights is the unnamed woman, the concubine, found in Judges, chapter 19, verses 1 through 30. This story is packed with so many gold nuggets, so many important details. I'm not going to get into all of the details in these moments, but there's one particular theme that we want to highlight. There's one reflective question that I want us to think about in this story. Please read the whole story in its entirety because there's so many wonderful golden nuggets featured in this story. However, one particular theme that we want to highlight for our time together today in summary is the particular master or husband of the concubine in this story of Judges 19, 1 to 30 begins to, after a tumultuous journey, when they arrive back home, the master or the husband of this concubine woman then begins to commit physical violence against her and actually physically cuts her body into 12 pieces. Can you believe it? Can you believe it? This is a really sad story. So many people don't preach from this story on Sunday morning. So many people don't talk about this story during Sunday school or during Bible studies because it's a really difficult, painful story. He cuts her body into 12 pieces and sends each piece of her body to one of the 12 tribes of Israel as retribution for rape that this woman experienced while on this journey. And so we want to highlight this story, usually helps us, or we want to highlight this story because this helps us to talk about violence in interpersonal relationships. Violence in our interpersonal relationships, or otherwise known as our relationships, our intimate relationships with partners, husbands, wives, and spouses. We want to highlight the ways in which it is so important for us to prevent IPV, or what we call is intimate partner violence. IPV is what we call intimate partner violence. Here are some strategies that we often list up as important for us to address IPV. I'll give you a moment to check out these on your screen. These strategies include teaching safe and healthy relationship skills, engaging influential adults in fear, disrupting the developmental pathways for partner violence, creating a protective environment, strengthening economic support for families, and supporting survivors to increase safety and lessen harm. Any thoughts from our audience?
Right now, there were some, Diane made some comments on spanking and aligning with your statements on spanking. I wanna also add, as we're talking about domestic violence, I also like to put it in, the broader category of the society that we are forced to live in right now. We live in America. It's just where we are, and part of that, is we have to really take into account how much we are influenced by Europeans and the way. And I'm not saying Europeans are only violent people on the planet. What I'm saying is we live in a country where right now we don't have the option of alternative ways at this point of dealing with one another. And I'm speaking from an African perspective, and not that all African, were nice and peaceful. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that we are influenced by the society that we live in. January 6th is connected to domestic violence. I know it's in the broader context of political, hate, violence, and all of that, but it is a societal way of addressing people that disagree with you, that think differently from you, that frustrate you, that upset you, that disappoint you. It is a consistent way that this country and people in this country are conditioned to address disappointment and things like that. And it always boils down to violence. Why is it that the newspapers sell more papers when it says when it bleeds, it leads? Why is it, that the most popular shows have to have, this, whether it's reality TV and the verbal violence that we see and the nastiness and the meanness, which you see on TikTok now. So everybody's got to check somebody in a very nasty and mean way. Why is it that the number one sport is football, which means I'm going to take land from you? It's because this is what we're conditioned with. So as we think about how we relate to one another, we also want to think about, as that beautiful list of dealing with interpersonal relationships, how we are influenced by what's going on around us, and then try to begin to readjust and change the way we think about people, about other people that, especially when you're in a relationship with, I'm dating myself, the Mills brothers. I know Dr. Buhuro, you know nothing about the Mills brothers. Well, the Mills brothers, right.
Okay, I'll Google them.
Right, please. The Mills brothers had a song that said, "You always hurt the one you love." That proximity can be very dangerous based on the way we see how to resolve conflict. And during the pandemic, my God, how many people had to shelter in place with somebody that was an abuser because of the way we see this world, and because of the way we don't get the tools on how to have, how to resolve conflicts, So Diane says, I went to Trinity. Diane says, I went to a Trinity Synergy for counseling in Chicago, and it helped me a lot to cope with the domestic violence I survived through in my past, and I am a much better person now. So turn it back over to you.
No, I so appreciate that. I so appreciate that. I so appreciate that. We want to also, last but not least, our final story that we want to highlight is the story of Jephthah's daughter. Jephthah's daughter. The last and final topic that we want to highlight is child abuse. Jephthah's daughter. Jephthah's daughter. This is the final story highlighted in our Texas Terror book by Phyllis Tribble. Jephthah is currently a military leader. He's fighting in a war. And unfortunately, he gets a little anxious. And as he's fighting in the war, he's actually fighting against the Ammonites. And he believes that he's going to lose the war because their army is larger and stronger and has more military resources, more weaponry. So he thinks that he's going to lose this battle. So he simply says, hey, everybody, let me pray for a second. And he prays and he asks God, he says, let me think about something for a second. He says, how about this? How about this? Lord, if you allow me to win this battle, first thing that comes running out my front door, I'll sacrifice to you. Jephthah had a lot of animals. And he believed that when he got home from the war, an animal would simply come running out his front door. And he thought that'd be cool. I'll sacrifice this animal to you, and that'll be that. He makes his prayer to the Lord, and the Lord allows him to win the battle. Well, he's so happy. He's celebrating. He's so excited. He goes home, And as he's making his way home, guess what runs out of his house? His daughter. His daughter is the first quote unquote thing that runs out of his house. His daughter is the first quote unquote thing that runs out of his house. And now he's grieved in his spirit. He tells his daughter, look, I made this covenant with the Lord. And his daughter says, okay, Dad, you have to live by the covenant that you made. Give me 3 months to go hang out and play with my friends, and then I'll come back home and you can kill me. And so this text, and he does just that. This text makes us think about child abuse. Phyllis Tribble lists up this text for us to reflect on, especially during Domestic Violence Awareness Month, to help us think about child abuse and the ways in which we need to also see child abuse as a form of domestic violence. How do we understand child abuse as a form of domestic violence? There's a few reflective questions that I would invite you to think about on this text, about this text. Number one, we believe and we say that God is a gracious God and a merciful God. We say that we believe that God is a gracious God and a merciful God. But do we really mean that? Do we really mean that? Do we really see God as a gracious God or a merciful God? Because why couldn't Jephthah just simply pray back to God and say, look, God, I know I made this promise to you, but I don't want to sacrifice my daughter. That is my daughter. I didn't know my daughter would be the first quote unquote thing that would run out my house. How do we advocate for women today? Why was Jephthah okay with allowing violence to come against his daughter? Why was Jephthah okay with that? Why have we become a community or a society that is okay with violence against our sisters, where we look the other way, where we become accepting of it? Why is that? How is that? Number three, we must also begin to wrestle with, would God really have been angry with Jephthah? Or would God have punished Jephthah? Jephthah would have said, I'm not killing my daughter. Do we serve a God that penalizes us for poor decisions that we make, even for requests that we make? Like, if you let me win this battle, I'll kill first thing that runs out of my house. I don't believe we serve a God like that. And so I'm often scratching my head about this story because I say, wow, why didn't Jephthah just go back to God and say, God, I made a mistake. Forgive me. I don't want to kill my daughter. I can't kill my daughter. What's another plan we can come up with? I'll pause for a moment. I want us to rethink our theology.
You know, what is also I add to the story, because you asked the question, why didn't Jephthah, just take it back? Just say, look, no, this ain't gonna happen. Jephthah was a violent man. His story didn't start there. His story started a lot before that. And it goes to what you just said about child abuse. Jephthah was born because his daddy had an affair with a prostitute. And when he was born, at some point, his stepmother, his father's wife, she had other sons, and she didn't like this. Does this sound familiar? She didn't like her sons playing with the son, as it said, of a prostitute, because daddy had an affair, and mama just couldn't take it, and she couldn't accept the boy. Anybody remember Fences and Denzel Washington and Viola Davis? Wasn't it Viola that played the wife? And she took in the boy. But she told Denzel's character, she said, now me and you gonna have a different relationship, but this boy shouldn't be punished because of that. Well, Jephthah's stepmother, like Sarah did to Hagar, she made the father put him out as a pre-teenager, made daddy put him out. And so he ends up hanging out with the street organization, and he organizes his own mob, and they go mobbing and marauding, and they're the biggest gang going on. Read the scripture. And they're the toughest gang and the most violent gang. And then his daddy's folk, their village gets attacked by this other group, and they don't have the soldiers to fight. And so the elders of the towns tell his daddy, go talk to your son, because he's the most violent gang going on, and we need him to come and defend us. And the daddy goes to do it, and Jephthah says to his daddy, you want me to save you after you threw me out? And his daddy says, yes, we need you. And so he says, I will, but on one account. Daddy says, what? You make me the king. You make me the leader of the community. And he told the elders, and they agreed. So now he's the leader. But guess what? He never got that resolved. Now it's not excusing, but what it shows is what you're talking about is how do we value children that are born so we don't raise monsters who make dumb statements and end up thinking, because I got a gangster's code. If it's a gangster's code, I said this, I gotta follow through with it. Many of us know who have tried to run around with street organizations that there's a code and you live by that code. And if you say it, there's a pumpkin head coming. Y'all don't remember pumpkin head, but there's some stuff gonna happen. He never got that address. And so he makes this dumb statement, and he believes, his theology believes that God lives by that code. God don't live by that code. But that's what he believes, and he ends up with it's a horrible story that he now kills his own daughter because he thinks God lives by the same code he does. Do you think God, and I'm saying this to the community, do you think God lives by the same American code that you live by? That's a weak God. I couldn't serve a God that lives by the same humanistic social nation code that I live by. So I'm gonna drop it right there.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Thank you for that wonderful wisdom and insight. Thank you for that wonderful wisdom and insight. Any thoughts from our chat?
Let me see. Diane says, I am going to end saying thank you for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. It seems that I'm the only one on here. And no, Diane, you're not the only one. Diane also says, I had to go to civil court for domestic violence, and in front of the judge and all the state's attorney and my mother who came with me, I had to say out loud that domestic violence is a crime. And Jeanette writes, no, God don't live by the same code that I live by in this country. God is bigger than me. And so those are some of the comments that we have.
Awesome. We want to thank you all so much for tuning in to our Tuesday Bible studies, all for us to have these wonderful, wonderful conversations. I also like these conversations, Diane, just to let you know, because this video is also uploaded to Facebook. And so we get into other conversations after people watch the video online. So these videos reach so many people. So no, you're never alone. You're never alone. I want to thank our pastor for allowing me to lead our time together and focus during this month of October on domestic violence awareness. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I always get a bit saddened because I think so many churches refuse to talk about domestic violence during the month of October. And so we thank our pastor for his courage, his bravery, his openness, his prophetic calling to say, no, this is an important topic, and we need to definitely talk about it. Also, we want to turn your attention to November. November, join us again. We're coming right back next Tuesday because we're going to have another wonderful Bible study topic. I won't give it away. It's a surprise. It's a surprise. Now, I'm telling you, you don't want to miss it. You don't want to miss it. So come on back, Diane and friends. Come on back. Join us next Tuesday, okay?
Amen. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Buhuro. I cannot wait because y'all, guess what, y'all? I don't even know what next month topic gonna be. So I'm waiting with bated breath, tiptoe anticipation. I'm excited, y'all.
So many of us are. So many of us are. You're not alone. So many of us are too.
Absolutely. So have a good week. I'll see some of you all this evening in Bible class, but for the rest, y'all have a good week, and